So how do we now add this post to a list of read later posts? Well, in the end, we'll need to manage a list of stored posts. And of course, we want to get that list from the session. So we get our stored posts by accessing request.session and then maybe stored posts like this, but that would fail if the user didn't store any posts before. So it's better to use the get method and access stored posts, because this will not fail, but just return none if there are no stored posts yet. So if stored posts is none, if there are no stored posts yet, I will simply set it to a new empty list. And then, either way, we want to add this post, which was selected by the user, to this stored posts list. Now, important here is that I don't want to add the post object as a whole. Instead, I just want to add the post ID, so that later on the to be added page where we show the read later posts, we are getting those IDs and we can fetch the full post objects there. Hence here, to stored posts, I now want to append the request post and there the post ID field. Keep in mind, in the template, in this form, which is the form submitting the request to this view we're working on, there will be this post ID field as part of the form. That's why we can safely access it here and store that post ID or add this post ID to our stored posts. I will actually store it as a number though, and therefore I'll call int to convert this ID which we're getting to a number. And then it's this number which is added to stored posts. But maybe this post was already stored in stored posts. That's something we should check first. So before appending our post, I want to add another if check, and I want to check if the ID we're about to add is already part of stored posts. So we'll actually grab this transformation of the submitted ID and perform this first. Post ID is the result of calling int on request post ID. And then I check if post ID is in stored posts already. Of course, that won't be the case if it's an empty list, but if we got it from the session and it already contained data, then we very well might have that post ID in that list already. So if that is the case, if post ID is in stored posts already, then I of course don't want to append. However, we can check the opposite and check if it's not in stored posts, and then only append if that is true. So we only make it into this if check if the post ID is not part of the stored posts yet, in which case we append it. Otherwise, we don't do anything. Because otherwise we want to redirect somewhere else. And it's now up to you where you want to redirect here. I think it makes sense to redirect back to the starting page maybe, or to that read later page which we're about to add. Now here I will simply redirect with HTTP response redirect to the starting page, so to just /nothing. So this should hopefully add our ID to stored posts if it's not part of it yet. Though here, of course, we therefore also need to add post ID, so that this post ID is added to stored posts if it's not part of the list yet. With that, if we save all of this, if I reload here and click on read later, I'm redirected to the starting page, so I assume it worked. But let's now work on a separate page, on a new page which we add, where we show all these saved posts. So for showing these stored posts, I'll add a brand new template here. And I'll name it stored-posts.html. Now, just as with the other templates, I want to extend base HTML. So I'll add that in there. And of course, I want to set a title. So I'll copy that over there and say my stored posts. And I then also, of course, want to set up that content block with the main page content. Now, when it comes to the styling and the look of this page, that's of course totally up to you. I'll add a simple section here, and in this section, I want to output a list of all my stored posts with links which we can click to be taken to those posts. So I want to have an unordered list in there. And then in there, I want to have list items where I basically just have a link to that post like this. And then as a link text, it's the post title. And we would have multiple of such links here. So really just short titles that lead to the post. Of course, you could make this more complex. You could also output the image here if you want to, but I want to have a really short and concise list here. Now we need to make sure that this template is loaded though, and that we have a URL for reaching it. I would say that it makes sense to use this read later URL and therefore this view again. But now we add a get method to that view for getting that page and that list of posts. So here I add the get method to the read later view. And the goal now is here to dive into the session, get the stored posts, and send those stored posts to the template. However, not just the IDs, which is the data we're storing in the session, but instead the full post objects. Now to achieve this, we first of all need to get our stored posts just as we did here in the post method. Now this might be none, but of course it might also be that list we're looking for. I then want to check if stored posts is none, so if we don't have any stored posts at all. If that's the case, or if the length of the stored posts is 0, so we have a list technically, but it has no items, if that's the case, I want to return without any posts, and I want to show some information on that read later page. So we could configure our context object here, our context dictionary, for the to be rendered template, and then simply here add a key where I set posts equal to an empty list, and I also set an extra key in this dictionary, has posts, which I'll set to false. Else, if we do have stored posts, we want to fetch those posts from the database, and we then want to set those in our context. So therefore, we need to reach out to the database and fetch data from there. For this, we use the post model, which we're already importing. And we want to get objects, but not all objects. Instead, we want to filter them, and we only want to get objects for the IDs stored in stored posts. This can be done by using a special modifier when using this filter method. We're interested in the ID field, but only in IDs which are part of that list. For that, we can use the __in modifier and then set this equal to our stored posts list. And this makes sure that we only fetch the posts where the IDs of those posts are part of that stored posts list. So that's then my posts, and then I can set context posts here in this case to posts, and I'll set context has posts here to true. And then after this if else block, we return the render method into which we pass the request and where we render the block stored dash posts HTML template and pass in this context object or this context dictionary, which we populate here. And that should hopefully load us our stored posts. Now to see whether that works, I have to add a new link to our navigation. So in our base template, where we have that navigation, I'll add a second link where I say stored posts. And here we want to construct a URL to this read later URL. So here it's URL read later. And when we now save all files we have stored posts here. We might want to work on the styling. We can do that in a second. But we have stored posts here, and we are taken to this page with our dummy output. Now let's output some actual data here, because we are fetching those stored posts and we are passing them to the template here with these lines. So in the template, we now actually can loop through those posts. So add a for tag here and go through the post in posts to repeat list items as long as we have stored posts, like this. And then here we want to output the actual post title, of course. So post title. And here we want to construct a URL to that post, which we can do with the URL tag. Then the name of the URL, which is this detail page. So post detail page, because that's the page that should be loaded if we click on a post. And then the value for the dynamic segment, which has to be the slug, and therefore should be post.slug here. With that, if we save this, I don't see anything here. So we're not loading any posts. And that's related to our view. In the post method, we are getting stored posts from the session and we are updating that. But we are not saving that data back into the session thereafter. And that is something we have to do. Whenever we add an ID, a post ID to stored posts, after updating stored posts, we should reach out to request session and then add that stored posts key here and set this equal to stored posts. If that key didn't exist before, it's then created now, or if it did exist now, it's updated with our updated stored posts. So that's something we have to do here to store the posts we selected for reading. With that, it should work, but before we make it work, I'll go back to the template for listing all our stored posts. And there, I actually want to go to the section and add an if tag and check if we have posts with the hasPosts variable, which we also set here in our view, hasPosts. And if we don't have posts, so if not hasPosts, then I want to output a text here where I say you didn't save any posts for later. And output this message in this case, so that we see this message here. Now it's overlapping with some other styles here, but we'll fix the styling in a second. For the moment, this is showing up here. And let's now show if we now are able to save posts for reading them later. So if I go to mountain hiking and click read later, and I then click on stored posts, that's here. And theoretically, we could click on it if the styling would be fixed. So that's therefore what I'll work on next. Let's make sure that all the styling is looking good again, and that we are able to see those stored posts in a little bit of a nicer way, that we can click them, and that we have a navigation which we can see here as well.